All right, let's get into a really pivotal story in the Sherlock Holmes universe, The Adventure of the Greek Interpreter. Now this one, from way back in 1893, is a huge deal. Why? Because it drops a bombshell, a secret that completely changes how we see the world's greatest detective.
And that bombshell is, well, it's right there in that question. What if the legendary Sherlock Holmes wasn't even the smartest person in his own family? I mean, think about that. For the first time ever, we're forced to imagine that the genius we all know and love might actually be second best.
So, who could possibly outsmart Sherlock? Well, that brings us to the story's biggest reveal, his smarter brother.
Okay, so let's break down this dynamic. It's kind of wild. On one hand, you've got Sherlock, all energy, all action, out there in the field getting his hands dirty. But then, you have Mycroft. And Sherlock himself says it. Mycroft's brain is just on another level. But he has zero energy, total inertia. He's the ultimate armchair detective, a mind so powerful it barely needs to move. And this is huge. It completely reframes Sherlock's genius, right? He's not some one-off miracle. He's just the get-up-and-go brother in a family of super geniuses.
And where does a guy like that hang out? Well, in the weirdest place imaginable, of course. Mycroft helped start something called the Diogenes Club. It's basically a club for men who hate clubs, the most antisocial guys in London. And the #1 rule? No talking. Seriously, it's the perfect spot for someone who literally lives inside his own head.
So even though Mycroft doesn't go looking for trouble, his reputation means trouble finds him. And that's exactly what happens here. He brings a case to Sherlock. It's about his neighbor, a Greek interpreter named Mr. Melas. And let me tell you, the story this guy has, it's a straight-up nightmare. This is where things get really dark.
Which brings us to the core of the mystery, the interpreter's nightmare. This is what happened to poor Mr. Melas.
So it starts like this. Mr. Melas gets an offer for a translation job. The pay is amazing, almost too good to be true, and it is. He gets picked up in a carriage, but the windows are all covered up so he can't see where he's going. The guy who hired him, Harold Latimer, is sitting there with a bludgeon, a heavy club, basically making it very clear this is not optional. He's been kidnapped. And what they take him to is just horrific. Inside this strange house, he's faced with this poor, starved-looking man who's being held prisoner. And get this, the prisoner's mouth is taped shut with plaster. Melas's job is to translate for these criminals as they try to force this guy to sign away his property. It's just a brutal, awful scene.
But here's where Mr. Melas proves to be incredibly brave and clever. He realizes the captors don't understand a single word of Greek. So, right under their noses, he pulls off this brilliant move. When they ask him to translate something into Greek, he adds his own secret questions. Then, when the prisoner answers in Greek, Melas gets the real information, but only translates back the simple yes or no the captors are expecting. He's basically running a secret intel operation in real time.
Suddenly, the whole thing is thrown into chaos. A woman named Sophie rushes into the room, and she and the prisoner, whose name we now learn as Paul, clearly know each other. They're brother and sister. For the bad guys, this is a disaster. Their cover is blown, so they grab Sophie and they haul Mr. Melas out of there, dumping him in the middle of nowhere, miles from home, hoping he'll just disappear. All right, so Mr. Melas has told his story. Now it's time for an urgent investigation. And this time, it's not just Sherlock on the case. And things start moving fast. Mycroft, the guy who never moves, has already put ads in the paper looking for Paul and Sophie. They get a response with an address. But just as they get this lead, the worst possible thing happens. Mr. Melas is kidnapped again. The clock is ticking. This isn't about solving a puzzle anymore. It's a flat-out race to save a man's life. So they're racing against time, headed straight for what they know is a deadly trap. When they get to the house and break down the door, they're hit with this awful smell. They trace it upstairs to a sealed room, and they realize what it is: charcoal fumes. The villains have turned the room into a crude gas chamber. Inside, it's the worst-case scenario. They find both Paul Corroborates and Mr. Melas tied up, left to suffocate. For Paul, it's too late. He's already gone. But Mr. Melas is still breathing, just barely. And thank God for Dr. Watson, who's right there and manages to revive him. But the criminals, Latimer and his partner, they've vanished.
So Mr. Melas is safe. And now we finally get the whole story. But this isn't just about the crime. It's about what happens after. It's about a terrible revenge.
So here's the whole rotten scheme. This guy, Latimer, seduced Sophie back in Greece just to get his hands on her money. He brought her to England to isolate and control her. When her brother Paul showed up to protect her, they kidnapped him to try and force him to sign everything over. And when Mr. Melas accidentally got involved and figured things out, they didn't hesitate. They just decided to murder them both. Cold-blooded.
Let's look at how this all plays out for everyone involved. Paul, tragically, is dead. Mr. Melas, thankfully, survives. But what about the killers, Latimer and Kemp? Well, they get away. They flee the country. But that's not the end of their story, not by a long shot. Because a little while later, a very interesting newspaper clipping lands on Holmes's desk. The report is about two Englishmen who were found stabbed to death in Hungary. The authorities think maybe they fought each other, but Holmes, he knows better. He's pretty sure this wasn't some random fight. He suspects that justice found them, delivered by the one person who had every reason to want them dead.
And that leads us to the final, chilling question of the whole story. Was it Sophie? Did she hunt down the men who murdered her brother and deliver her own brand of justice? The story never says for sure, and that ambiguity, that dark possibility, that's what makes it so unforgettable.